Cybersecurity concerns are ever evolving. OT cybersecurity is even more complex, and it's so much more than just software and hardware. How do you stay on top of it all? Aaron Crow has over 25 years experience with cybersecurity. 15 of those years focused on operational technology across multiple industries, and he wants to help you. Welcome to the Protect OT Cybersecurity Podcast, brought to you by Industrial Defender. Now here's your host, Aaron Crow.
Hey, welcome to the show. I'm really excited about today's conversation. Eric, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little about you and who you are and a little bit about your background, maybe.
All right. Thanks, Aaron. I appreciate the chance to be here. So I started out my career in law enforcement. Thought I was going to be a cop forever. That was kind of had been my dream and really what I thought I was going to do. Life kind of changes, and I ended up shifting direction. I was in healthcare security for about 16, 17 years. And started dabbling with some consulting, had the chance to write a couple books, including Workplace Security Essentials. That's my most recent book. And really just been very interested in how security becomes a part of, especially small businesses that don't even usually think about security at all, and the kind of risks that go along with that. I'm passionate about martial arts, so the book actually, each chapter compares one aspect of self-defense and martial arts to how you protect your organization. So I really made it a little more fun writing it that way than just a dry textbook type thing about security processes and procedures and so forth. My consulting firm, as you would imagine, is called Business Karate, kind of building on that same idea and same concept.
Right. That's awesome. I love it. Yeah. Make it, digestible. The same thing in prep for this conversation, I said, I want this to be a conversation, right? We want people to be listening and it not feel like, you don't want them to think they're taking medicine by listening to this. It shouldn't be hard. It should just be a fun conversation they get to listen to. That's awesome. So let's talk a little bit about, what that security looks like from a physical perspective. So on this podcast, we talk a lot about, cyber things and hackers and, nation states and even, insider threats and things like that. But usually from the technical side, from using a computer to get in and get information. But a lot of those attacks start with somebody physically accessing an environment, somebody getting into a building or somebody walking into past security, and they're inside your environment now. So all of the protections, the firewalls, all the other things that you did are null and void because they walked right around them and plugged directly into your conference room and nobody stopped them.
Right, and that's, that insider threat is always, the biggest issue that we have to worry about. The people that we're bringing into our space and what they're going to do. Hospitals, for example, are huge on that. The patients are the biggest source of violence, and, but there are people that have to be here. Legally, we have to see them in a hospital.
Right.
And it's that same general concept. I've been fortunate to be part of security reviews at a number of different data centers when evaluating those for organizations I've worked with. And it's always that insider threat. Who gets in there? You can have all the barriers and gates and barbed wire and guns, whatever out there. But once somebody's inside, they've already been okayed and they can do really anything.
Right.
And that's always the biggest threat. So from a kind of an overarching view, I really see physical security as so fundamentally important to all different organizations. And it's going to look different from one to another, but you're protecting against threats just like in cybersecurity. Those can come from a lot of different directions, and it's the same basic concept, although sometimes the threats are a little bit different.
Sure. Yeah, I think I mentioned it to you before, but here recently in the news, we've seen where, critical infrastructure in North Carolina, people are shooting out substations and, walking in and, I've been in this place, working power plants and hard hats and things like that. Right. I can look the part and probably get past security because I know the things to say. I know who to talk to with a little bit of, investigation. I can probably, social engineer my way into an environment just because I can look the part. Right. I can speak the lingo. But, it goes back to, it doesn't matter how many firewalls or security tools I do. If I don't look at that as well, it's going to be an impact. And it's going to be, the other analogy I like to give is you put all the security you want on your front door, but you leave your back door wide open. Like it doesn't make a lot of sense because yes, your front door is nice and secure, but there is nobody on the back door. It's wide open.
Nope. That is so true. And you're reminding me of something. For a long time, I've said with a white pickup truck and an orange safety vest and even a orange light on top of the pickup, you can go anywhere and do anything, and nobody will ever question it.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, if you look the part, I've been in hundreds of power plants in the country, and if you have the right hard hat and you have the safety gear and you have your PPE and you look like you're supposed to be there, like most people are not going to stop you. They're doing their daily job. So, how do you recommend companies stop or think about that kind of thing and train their employees to look for things that are out of context? And me having the right PPE and wearing the hard hat and things like that, like what can you look for? What can you train your employees to do to be looking for those types of not necessarily attacks, but bad actors that could be trying to do something they shouldn't be doing?
Yeah, and I think that's a challenge I've seen in many different circumstances and different ways. But it's really about educating people on the most basic things. Like, don't just let somebody in just because they look the part, just because they have a story that sounds reasonable. Don't be shy about questioning that, and make sure that you have some process in place that it's easy for them to follow up. If somebody's walking around looking like a contractor in a building where they shouldn't be, the employees really should have easy access. Who do we call? Do we call the engineering team, facilities, security? What does that look like in your organization? So they have a way of reporting it and putting a stop to it right away. Yeah. It's a lot like educating people about phishing emails. It really comes down to that human factor and just making sure that they're asking the right questions when they see something that doesn't look quite right.
Yeah, the safety culture in a lot of organizations I've been at, they would actually give you a challenge coin that says, stop when unsure. And they're literally giving people the power, and I've got some of them on that thing back there, right? But they're literally giving people power to challenge someone, right? It doesn't matter if you're the CEO or whomever. They want to empower people that, hey, you're not going to get in trouble if you stop somebody. Like, I'm not going to yell at you. You're not going to get reprimanded for it. In fact, we're going to celebrate you, even if you're wrong, even if they do have the rights to be here, because most of the time you assume they will have the right to be here. But you would rather them ask when they're not sure than just assume, well, they probably deserve to be here. I don't want to step up and put my neck out there because I don't want to take the ramifications if I'm wrong.
And you touched on something that I think is so important too, and that's having that buy-in and support from leadership all the way up through an organization. I remember years ago hearing about a security officer contacted somebody that was smoking a cigar next to an oxygen tank at a hospital, and the guy started chewing him out saying, "Do you know who I am?" And the officer's like, "No, I don't." Turned out it was the CEO, sitting there right next to the no smoking sign, next to the oxygen tank, having his cigar. And I can't help but think, what did that have to do with no matter what lip service he gave, really his actions said more about his view of safety and security than really anything else. So it's fundamental to have that support throughout the organization all the way to the top. And without it, I think as a security professional, it's very, very difficult to really make any kind of change or get things accomplished without that.
How much effort do you see as far as coming in, left of boom before something bad happens and changing a culture versus after the bad event? Like something happened, I was attacked, somebody stole something, the CEO blew up the oxygen tank, whatever the bad thing that happened. How much progress or are you able to push things through before versus after?
I feel like I've been pretty fortunate in being able to get a lot of that done in advance and really making some kind of the changes that I've wanted to see for security. A lot of times it takes some patience. Things don't always turn on a dime. A lot of times you're asking for some pretty significant chunks of money. So you got to convince people that this is really the right thing to do. And I think it's about being consistent with that messaging over that period of time, having a strategic outlook of what it is that you're trying to accomplish, and then really building that understanding of why that's important. I want to do X because these three factors are a problem, and they're going to cause risk for us, and they're going to be a problem down the road if we don't address it. And again, sometimes it's being patient, sometimes it's building, support with the right stakeholders, and slowly building that and getting it pushed through. It can be time consuming in some organizations. Things don't always happen, like I said, immediately. So
You mean it's not easy to push through these things, right?
no, patient, consistency, and strategic plan. Those would be my three real takeaways on that.
Yeah, and again, I assume, and again, I've seen some of this, but I would assume it's just like with anything. Like in the cyber world, I can buy these cool cyber tools and I can stand these things up. But just like on the physical side, I can put up a gate or a fence or hire a guard with a gun or whatever that thing is. But that alone is not enough. Like that's not the silver bullet that's going to fix everything. In cyber, we call it's people, process, and technology, right? So the same thing on the physical security world, I would assume, is it's more than just putting up the gate. I also have to enable my team. I have to train people. I have to build the processes, the solution we just talked about with the challenge coin or whatever that looks like. Mm-hmm. It's more than just buying the badge readers, right? It's more than buying the cameras. It's more than putting up the gate or the guard or that kind of thing. It's all those things together. Is it the same in physical as well?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, everything. Connects to something else. And, even say you're putting up a new camera system or adding to an existing camera system, you really have to be able to then take the time to train people on what to do. Something sound easy, people I want a duress alarm, at my desk. And you still have to be able to get that message across. Security has to know what to do when that alarm comes across. Sure. Where is it? What's that response look like? I mean, just even something as simple as that. And sometimes the simpler something sounds, the harder it is to actually get it rolled out and implemented the right way. A lot of times you can't just send an email out saying, hey, everybody start doing this today,
So what does that onboarding look like as far as when you're rolling out massively different environments or organization, rolling out different changes, and when you're putting in a gate or all this type of stuff, right? How much of that is training the folks? How much of that is process on the back end? And obviously you have to train people on what to look for. What does good look like versus what is bad? Does everybody have a uniform, or does everybody supposed to have PPE? What badge do they need? Should they have checked in? Like, what do I do? Like, what are the scenarios that I stop someone and take action, and what are those steps? Like, what is that playbook?
Yeah, I mean, it varies a lot. Even something simple like putting in a gate at a parking lot. Again, it sounds real simple, but, there's a lot of little pieces that go into it. What if the gate breaks? Then
right.
Does security have a key to override it? How do they override it? How does somebody let them know the gate's broken? I mean, all those things that kind of come together when you're putting something like that. And the bottom line is really communication is so vital and critical. And I think it's so easy to overlook. I tend to usually I'm not very verbose in a lot of things. So I kind of just say something and think, well, that's done. And it's not always so easy. Sometimes we have to really deliver that message over and over again, tailor it to the audience. Even the simplest things, can take a lot of reinforcement to get that message across to everybody that needs to be involved. And then looking at all the details, like the gate example, if there is a key to override it, where's that going to be? Does everybody know what they need to do? If it's electronic switches in there, do they know what to hit to override the gate? Just all those little things that kind of come together on any kind of project like that.
Right. And then how much of that is integrated, in the projects that you're doing these types of things on, how much of that is there a cyber representative at those tables? Because obviously all of these components they have IPs and they have control systems and all these different things. So I'm guessing there's probably a cyber interaction with building out these physical security, because all of those things live across cyber and there's cyber implications to them as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, from a physical security standpoint, you have to have a close relationship with IT. Whether it's necessarily cybersecurity function or IT in general, because everything anymore is going to touch the network. You need just to manage IP addresses, where something's going to sit, where the encoders are, where you're going to run cable, how it's going to impact the server with video, what's the bandwidth impact. There's so many different factors that are involved, especially in my last role. I was at a large urban safety net hospital, and we worked with IT constantly on everything that we did. And I mean, that has to be there. I mean, everything is just too much technology driven. You can't do it alone.
Right. And then on the flip side, I would assume if I'm rolling out something on the cyber side, I need to many times I'm going to have to include physical as well. So if I'm changing the way a network works, or I'm doing things again because of all the cyber implications, but also the physical side, there's a lot of overlap. A lot of the times when I'm talking at these things, if you need to get something done at a big level, you need to make sure you have the right parties at the table. And so many times I'm a technical guy, so I can just design this thing in my sleep, and but there's a lot of things, me being a cyber guy, I may miss out or not think about from a physical perspective. So I really need to make sure I include the right people at the table so that somebody like you and somebody from a physical security side can say, hey, what about this? Have you thought about that? Like, what is going to happen in this scenario, et cetera, right?
Absolutely. I think anymore, it really is a partnership, and I might be biased, but I like to think that, my 20 some plus years of experience have given me some insight into things that somebody else might miss.
Right.
Having responded to a lot of burglaries and break-ins and things like that in law enforcement, you start thinking, like, what does a crook think like? And you got to think that way a little bit to look for those gaps. I was looking at a design for a project even today, and initially it doesn't look bad, but then you start thinking, well, there's no line of sight around here, and then we got this dead spot, and what's that going to do? And this is a pretty critical area. So just kind of starting to be able to think about some of those physical things just through basic experience, having been in a similar role, and going, yeah, I definitely would want to see around that corner. So.
Yeah. I just recently moved from Dallas to the Austin area, and one of the exercises I went through with my oldest son, when we were there is he had this project, and we had to create a safety emergency evacuation type plan. So what happens in a fire? What happens if, we're not at home and there's a incident where they need help or medical or whatever, just kind of all those what if scenarios, like what would you do in this scenario, right? And I realized we've been here a few months now. I realized we haven't updated that. So we have a plan, but it really, all the muster points and everything that we did is back in Dallas, right? And it's way too far away. So we need to do that. So, and the reason I bring that story up is businesses need to do the same thing. You can't, it's not set it and forget it. Like, things change. You just talked about it, right? I'm adding a piece of equipment, or I have to move a camera, or all those types of things, right? All of those things are going to impact my plan, and I need to constantly be updating it, running through it, making sure nothing's changed or impacted, and that we need to adjust the plan and the training that goes along with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing you'll see in a lot of organizations is they actually have an expiration date for their policies and procedures. So it kind of forces you to review them over a period of time. But we've probably all seen examples of that kind of bad organizational memory where something is done just because the way it was always done, as long as anybody can remember. And you stop and think about it, or you can come in with a fresh set of eyes, and you're like, why are we doing it that way? That doesn't even make sense. I don't understand that. And, it's like any bad habit. It develops, and it's hard to get rid of. But that's where really being able to update those plans on a regular basis, and you can't just do it once and forget about it. Unfortunately, it takes some ongoing work and some elbow grease to keep things current moving forward.
Yeah, it's a constant movement, and it's that way. Obviously, it's that way in cyber as well. Coming up in power generation, a lot of times I heard, well, why do you do it this way? Well, we've always done it this way. Like, we've done it this way for 40 years. Like, I don't want to change it. Why would I change it? I've heard this a lot too. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, how do you know it's not broke? Like, if I'm challenging you or asking questions, maybe it is broke. Like, I guess my point is that we should always be open to at least have a conversation to confirm our biases. That is this the right thing? Are we doing the right thing? Is there a better way to do it? Is there a more efficient way to do it? Are we missing something? Just because we've done it this way for 40 years and haven't had an incident doesn't mean that there's not necessarily a better way we can do it, more efficient, updated way that can improve it.
Yeah, and it's like starting a new role, and you're coming in new, and a lot of it's like, why are we doing it this way? And sometimes there's some perfectly good reasons, and you find out, oh, well, okay, that does make sense. And then
Right.
Other things, it's like, well, maybe that's one we could look at changing.
Yeah, Exactly. What are some examples of those types of things where you've walked in and maybe they've done something for a long time and you walk in and like, have you thought about this? And maybe got some pushback or well, we've always done it that way. We don't need to worry about that.
Yeah, I'm the kind of person I like to experiment. I'm a little bit entrepreneurial, so I always like to push some changes. And so, I mean, there's quite a few like that. In one place, for example, I started working and it made no sense to me how the security staffing was set up. Like, some people were armed, some weren't. It just depended on if the officer had the right credentials, whether they were armed or not. And it's like, well, if we're going to have an armed program, shouldn't we kind of figure out where we want those officers and make sure that we always then have an armed officer in that capacity, rather than, they could be sitting at a desk answering a phone.
Right.
Or out on patrol. It's like we really should kind of think about, how we're managing these individuals. So that led to some huge changes in that organization. And there's just things like that you see all the time, even simple things like looking at a floor plan or a map and they're outdated and a camera's stuck in a back room where nobody is anymore, and they're like, oh, well, we used to have our safe for the cafeteria there, but now they moved down to the other end of the building. It's like, well, why didn't we move the camera when we moved the safe? Just little
I forgot.
things like that.
I guess we should have done that. But again, nobody's asking that question. It's that questioning attitude that really helps in all these types of scenarios, right? And sometimes that's where working with, an outsider coming in as a consultant or an assessment type role can really help us see things that we're just blind to. Like we work in these environments every day and we don't always see the blind spots, and bringing somebody in like yourself that has, the experience that you have coming from law enforcement, coming from seeing these different places and these different implementations is going to make you see it. So I was a realtor for a long time, and I would always look at, I was dealing with bank-owned foreclosures. So I would go in and I would look at, doing repair estimates on houses. So anytime I walked into a house, I'm looking and seeing cracks and all the things that are broken. Where a normal person walks in and most of the things are not even noticeable. I see it, but most people don't recognize it. So somebody like you can walk into a security environment, and you probably are the same way. You're noticing all those little things, camera out of place, and that one's not even turned on, and that's not even a real camera, and all that kind of stuff, where I walk in and I don't notice any of that stuff.
Yeah, it does. Sometimes I wish I could turn it off a little bit easier, but yeah, it's like usually I'll walk into someplace and I start immediately looking around, and it's like, oh, that door contact isn't connected to anything. What good's that doing there?
Right.
And so forth.
Yeah, and sometimes those policies and procedures are this is awesome. I don't know if you've noticed this, that it does the thumbs up thing and it does this bubble. Yeah. It threw me off.
I wonder where that's coming from.
I don't mean to. I talk with my hands, so the audience probably, if you're only listening to this, the new implementation on the Mac OS, when you do a thumbs up, you get this emotion that comes up and it does a bubble. So it's distracting sometimes.
I was wondering where that was coming from. I'm like, is somebody out there hitting that?
Nobody's live. This is recorded,
Yeah.
So I don't know why. It's just you and I that we get to see a thumbs up now. So, but yeah. So I guess going back to what I was saying is it's that experience is what that's the reason why I'm all the experience that I have. It's why I can walk into an environment. I can help people to see the things that they're missing and tie those dots together, right? So that's where we need to work with the physical security folks like yourself. When I'm doing a cyber policy, like if I'm doing an OT cybersecurity program at a power plant, right? I need to be thinking about physical security, and that's not my expertise. So I can't pretend. You don't want me designing your physical security thing. I'm a smart guy. I can probably figure some things out, but why would I want to try to do that when I can get you to do it, and you're going to know 1,000 things a lot faster and a lot more efficiently than I could ever read a book and try to figure it out on my own. Like, it just doesn't make sense.
No, and that's one of the things I'm passionate about. So, I love the opportunity when people are open to it, being able to go in and help them out and point out a few things. Like I said, I've spent a lot of years in law enforcement and security, and I'm kind of proud of my background and experience, and I hope it's helped me think in a little bit different way, in some cases.
Yeah, I mean, I think that skill set is exactly what, folks are looking for. So, I mean, a lot of the folks that are listening to this podcast are probably more on the technical side, on the cyber side, And I think that we're approaching the problems the same, right? So it's just a different problem that we're approaching. If I'm attacking if I'm trying to keep a hacker out, I'm gonna look to my playbook and what are the ways that I can do that? What are the attack vectors? What are the ways they can get in? Where can I put things that can detect them, that can stop them from getting in? I need to do the same thing on the physical side. So I'm good at it from the the ones and zeros. I need somebody that's just as good. I need to add to my team and make sure I have the right people on my team that are looking for it from the physical side. Because like we said when we started this, it doesn't matter how good my firewall is if somebody walks right past it and then plugs directly into the OT network, and now they're just on the network. So all of those protections, those defense and layered security that I put in, all this technical prowess that I'm so proud of, they just bypassed it all by walking directly up to the system.
Yep. That's always the potential problem, and there's always the secret back door that's left half open. So.
How many times are you seeing that type of thing? People reaching out saying, hey, we have all this stuff, and then somebody just walked in and connected directly to my system?
Quite a bit. Like I said, a lot of my experience has been in healthcare, so the
Right.
challenge there is you have to be open 24/7. I mean,
Sure.
that's federal law, and so people come in, and most of the hospitals, are old enough that they haven't really been built where they think about security, or even in some cases newer ones, they'd rather go for, instead of designing to security, and I understand it, but they want to go for the big grandiose lobby, and then
Sure.
there's multiple doors into the rest of the building, and we've found homeless people getting onto a computer at a reception desk, on a floor that's closed at night, and looking at pornography and things like
Sure.
that. And so, one guy in particular had a background in IT, as it turned out, but he was able to skirt some of those things. Didn't really do any harm per se, but
Right.
who wants that
Yeah.
on their network?
Yeah. And how much of that is obviously there's in physical, there's more than just, stopping, somebody from getting on a terminal. It's also loss prevention. It's also, trying to stop people from stealing things, trying to stop people from breaking things, as well as, again, from critical infrastructure perspective. So if I'm looking at power generation, for instance, I don't want them to shut down my environment. I don't want them to shut down that transmission substation or turn off my generator or my backup operations. If it's a server farm, I don't want them, crashing the network and things like that. So a lot of that is stopping people from getting in, but it's also, once they're in, making sure they're compartmentalized and, I can detect them and respond before they can do, spread their mayhem to other places and do more harm, right?
Yeah, and that's where, like in a hospital setting, for example, you'd like to be able to shut down each department that's not open 24/7. Have it not just a bunch of hallways that are open in every single department, but actually be able to secure that and control that access. Being able to get alert if somebody does go in there after hours. But a lot of it's also staff training. Really, the people that are there 24/7 need to be comfortable contacting security and reporting something when they see something. A lot of times it doesn't happen. I know one of the more frustrating things that I would get a lot would be, the next morning or sometimes days later, I'd get a complaint. Well, somebody was in our unit, and thinking, oh, wow, this just happened. And I find out, well, that was last Friday. And it's like, well, I can't really do anything about it now. They're long gone. I could find a video of them, but that doesn't really solve the problem.
Right.
I mean, that just helps after the fact. But having people that would actually report things timely when something's going on, rather than waiting and now I noticed something missing. The other thing that I always found kind of ironic, you mentioned some of the big potential losses and breaches and so forth, but sometimes the things that got people the upset the most was because, a homeless guy defecated by the front door of the admin building or
Right.
something. So, boy, you think the world was ending in a case like that. We want you to call the FBI, the Secret Service. You get them down here and solve this and figure this out. And it's like, okay, let's look at what happened. It sucks, but,
Right.
the risk level of this, he's outside, didn't get in, and that's kind of what happened.
So what do you feel is the biggest, or some of the biggest, reasons why the folks are not willing to stop and call that? Is it just because they're busy? It's because they don't think it's their problem, because they think they're getting in trouble? Like, what are some of the common or more common things that you're hearing when people are saying why they didn't call you until, oh, that was last Friday?
To be honest, I think a big piece of that is really the culture of the organization. And like I mentioned earlier, a lot of that's driven from the top down.
Yeah.
And I've been in organizations where it's a lot more finger pointing, and people just like to blame somebody else for whatever problem, and they don't really want to try to solve it. And I think that is a big piece of that. The second big part of that, I think, is also that, from a security standpoint, you want everybody, all the employees, to have confidence in the security team. And a lot of that comes through the training, having the right kind of presence, with your security staff, have them be friendly and engaging and so forth. And that will really drive people to a point where they're comfortable contacting security as well. So I would say that culture is definitely a big piece, and every organization is a little bit different in how they approach things like that. But then having that confidence in your security team.
Yeah. Yeah, and that aligns also on the cyber side. They do phishing attacks or whatever. You're trying to do those things internal to test your employees, and you want them to be able to raise their hand. You want them to raise their hand when they make a mistake. If they go to a website they shouldn't have, you don't want them to feel fear or try to cover their tracks. You want them to tell you, because that way you can hope that you can find it before it spreads to anything else. If they don't believe that you have the best intentions and they're going to get in trouble for it, they may try to cover it up, right? Not tell anybody. And that's not what you want. That's not what's best for the organization. So I agree. It's really from the top down, and that culture matters, right? So I've been in organizations that it's a safety culture, and they have those challenge coins, right? And they're really the people that believe that is the most important thing, right? And when those people believe it and they see it as, this is my home, this is my environment, this is my network, these are my employees, like I'm part of this company, right? And I feel empowered to be part of the solution to make sure that there aren't issues, right? When I feel empowered that way, I'm more likely to say something. The New York City, see something, say something, right?
Yep.
Back in the day, right? And that's because, New Yorkers felt like, hey, we're together because of this. Like, I want to see something because it's my New York, right? You want that culture in your environment, and you can't be like the CEO that was smoking by the no smoking sign. And that exists for you peons, not for me. I'm different, right? It can't be like that.
No, and I hope most CEOs aren't like that, but that was a story I heard about a nearby facility
Sure.
At one point in my career, and I was like, wow, glad I'm not working over there.
Unfortunately, it's gonna be a problem, right? It's gonna extend into, they're not calling until the next Friday, or things are not getting reported and all that, because they don't have faith that if they report, it's going to do any good, and the only good it's going to do is bad. Right? It's only going to get them in trouble. It's only going to get questions. It's only going to be a problem for them. So I'd rather just not say anything, right? It's not my issue. Yeah. I don't work for security, so you figure it out. It's not my problem, right? And that's not what you want people to think. It shouldn't be the way, because you can't hire enough security guards to cover everything. You need your employees to be almost part of your security team, whether it's the cyber side or it's the physical side. You need them to be ambassadors for, hey, if you see something, tell us, and we'll come in and help you. We have the skill set to help you, but we can't see everything. We're not gods.
Yep. And I think it is fundamental, like you mentioned, empowering people, and they've got to have that sense of ownership from start to finish. Security is a lot of times sort of an afterthought, and people think about it a little bit late, and kind of like the late reporting. I don't know why it is, but always like 5 o'clock on a Friday, somebody would call and say, well, we fired somebody. We need you to turn off their badge. And
right.
There were times when that was under a different department. It's like, well, there's nobody here now to even do that. We can't do it till Monday. And it's like, when did this happen? Oh, well, 2 days ago, but, we got the final word from HR today or something. It's like, why weren't we told? We could have deactivated the badge an hour ago. If
right.
We know.
Yeah. You should have told us 2 days ago, and then told us
2 days ago would have been even better. But
yeah, it's the same thing. I was doing a round table, and it's with the CISO, and they were asking, if somebody, if a bad actor, took an employee by gunpoint, and who's the most dangerous person? And I raised my hand because at the time I said, I know the passwords to all the environments. And if, that they had my kids, then I know how to get into everything. Right. And there's environments that have accounts that have been the employees have left years ago and they're still active. Maybe they're not, actively being used, but maybe some of them are because they're running a process or whatever. Like those are the types of things, old policies, ways that I can't get out of old things, old badge readers, not deactivating badge cards and things like that, right? Having physical keys and, giving them out and multiple people, you don't know who all has them, that chain of custody. So there's a lot of things like that are very similar on the cyber and the physical side that we're running from the same playbook, right? We're just doing it I'm doing it in the virtual space and you're doing it in the physical space, right? It's just how do you do it versus how do I do it? But the run book is very similar. We're just a little bit different, obviously different experiences and different, tools under our belt.
No, I agree. I mean, really the whole concept of how you identify risk and looking at threats and vulnerabilities is pretty much the same. It's just the vulnerabilities that I might be looking for are different from what you're looking
right.
for, but it's the same basic concept. Keys, things like that. Boy, I got some horror stories about key management, I could tell you.
It's the same thing on the physical side, right? On the virtual side, a lot of these OT equipment, they come with physical hardware and they have embedded passwords. So that's like having a key that I can't change. No matter what, somebody's got the skeleton key and I cannot rekey it no matter what. Right. And oops, I lost the key, or everybody knows the key and I have 1,000 copies out there and I don't know who all has it because everybody that has this system has this skeleton key. It's like, you get the master lock, keypad from Amazon and they all come with the same, three number key. Everybody's got them. If you've got a ring of keys, you try one, you're probably going to be pretty lucky and be able to open that lock.
Yep. Eventually you'll find the right one.
Right. And the same thing with, brute force and being able to try and lock picks. Again, going back to my real estate world, I would get these bank-owned foreclosures, and so they would be vacant houses and the bank owns them now, but they don't have a key. So I would have to gain entry. So I got really good at picking locks and drilling locks and things like that. And a lot of times I'd have a police officer come up and ask me what I was doing as I was breaking into a house, and I had to show the documentation of here I'm an authorized agent and blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. But, I got really good at, knowing which locks were easier to pick, which is why, like I only put Schlage locks on my front door because they're harder to pick for an amateur than a quick key, a quick set, right? Little things like that. Always have a deadbolt. Never have a handled front door, exit door, because it's really easy to turn and get into. Like little things like that. And this is not my expertise. This is just years of gaining access to a house where I had legal right to do so.
Yeah, but you learn a lot doing that. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they have these villages at some of these cyber conferences, and they do have physical lockpick villages, for instance. So I'll usually go to those and just kind of show off a little bit because I'll walk in and be able to pick a lock in like 5 seconds, and I just turn around and people are looking at me like, who is that guy? How did he do that?
Well, you're a lot better than me because in past role, my technicians all had lockpick sets, and I would sit there with master locks on my desk and pick at them all day long. And other than the easy training locks, I never really graduated beyond those. So.
It's fun to do. I can pick handcuffs, and I can pick, master locks and quick sets and things like that. Other ones are really a little bit more skill set. But again, I guess the point is if you have enough time and effort, it's like anything, firewall or front door or anything else. If I have enough access and physical time, I'm going to get in. I grab a hammer, grab a drill, drive my car through the front door. You can't physically stop somebody from getting in if they want in bad enough. So how do I do those layers of security to be able to detect, be able to respond, make sure I can send people up there, look for those things to happen. Yeah,
and the bottom line is at the end of the day, you don't have to make it impossible for somebody to get in. You just have to make it harder than the guy next door so they go there instead. So,
correct. Yeah.
That was a big piece of law enforcement. We'd have problem people hanging out in one area. We'd chase them off, send them somewhere else. They'd be in another part of town. They'd complain. We'd push them back. So.
Right.
It was just pushing problems around everywhere.
Yeah, it's the old saying that, your lock is not to keep out the bad guy, it's to keep out your neighbor.
Well, there is that.
Well, awesome. So all that we've talked about today, like in the next 5 to 10 years, like what's one thing that maybe you're excited about coming up in physical security and kind of how that integrates maybe with cyber or whatever, and maybe what's one thing that maybe is concerning that you see maybe coming up on the horizon?
I'd say in general, there's some really cool advancements in technology when it comes to security. The more we can see platforms integrated, like video integrated into access control, those things are huge. What the impact of AI is going to be, I don't know. That probably falls on maybe the other question a little bit more. That's something that's probably going to be a little bit concerning, depending on exactly, like any tool, it could be used for good or bad.
Yeah.
And what kind of impact is that going to have? Is it going to create ways to get around some of those security systems? The other thing that I think people are really starting to be aware of the risk of workplace violence more. So yeah. I think we're going to start seeing, more training around that, and hopefully good training, not just the kind of pencil whipping lip service that too often happens, but something that's really going to benefit people that might find themselves in a bad situation at work.
Yeah. Understood. Yeah. Yeah. I can definitely see that, from an AI and ML and a lot of those technologies where I can take somebody read a badge and then there's a camera looking at it, the Mission Impossible stuff, right? Yes. With the technology that's coming out, it doesn't have to be, MI6 and these crazy things, because the capabilities are they're coming down to a level that's affordable, that more and more people can implement really advanced capabilities that 10 years ago was in the movies. Now you can have it at, your mom and pop, donut shop, because it's all embedded into my Ring camera that notifies me when somebody rings the doorbell and does facial recognition and all that kind of stuff as well.
Yep.
Yeah, that's awesome. So tell us about your books. How do people get a hold of you? What books, where can they find your books? All that kind of good stuff.
So yeah, my most recent one is Workplace Security Essentials, and that's where each chapter I compare an aspect of protecting an organization to martial arts. Each chapter I kind of have the belt levels. So if you do this, you're at the white belt level and so forth, up to the black belt level.
Sure.
That's Workplace Security Essentials. It's on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever you want to find your books. My website is businesskarate.com, and you can reach me there, get my phone number, email, so forth. Redoing the website here in the next couple months, but that's always a good way to reach me, and I'm always happy to talk to people about security. It's definitely a passion of mine, so I really appreciate the chance to even talk today.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll put all those links in the show notes. I'll include links to your book as well as your website and how people can get a hold of you. So I appreciate your time today, Eric. It's a really important topic. I think that us cyber professionals need to really be thinking about how physical interacts with the overall cybersecurity program and how we can really make sure that we're looking at all the risks, not just the ones with ones and zeros.
All right. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you very much, Aaron.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Protect OT Cybersecurity Podcast. If you got some valuable information from today's show, please subscribe, rate, and review the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. To learn more about Aaron and to get your free copy of the OT Cybersecurity Solution Buyer's Guide, go to industrialdefender.com. That's industrialdefender.com, or you can click the link in the show notes.